to Trucking Genius. My name is Craig Ferguson. I'll be your host for this episode today. And today we have convinced Tom Moore, the Executive Vice President of the NPTC, to join us today. Tom, welcome, and thank you so much for carving out an hour for us to discuss.
Thanks so much, Craig. It's a pleasure to be here and share what insight I have about the industry. I look forward to it.
Well, if you don't mind, Tom, why don't you do a brief introduction, tell us about your journey to where you are today, and tell us about your current role with the NPTC.
Okay, great, Craig. I'm currently the Executive Vice President of the National Private Truck Council. It's a role that I've held since joining the organization full-time in 2007. If you go back prior to that, I've had a very checkered past. I actually got into the trucking industry immediately after college in 1978. And despite several efforts to try and get out, I have not been able to. It's a life sentence without parole, but I've loved every minute that I've spent in this industry. It's a industry full of very interesting people, very committed people, and I love being a part of it.
Yeah, similar. I had the same experience. I came into trucking from birth, and it's very hard to leave. It gets into your blood. It was very much a part of my upbringing and my family. So same idea. It just keeps pulling you back. But when you look at it, it's such a fascinating industry. It's so large, important, fragmented, and there's so many different players, and it affects so much of the economy and the country. It is fascinating. There's so many. We've been in it for such a very long time, but you still learn every day with new people coming in with different ideas. So I sympathize with you. It's very hard to get out once you do get in. Can you talk a little bit about your role at the NPTC and how you came to that role and why you've continued to support them?
Well, I think my role basically includes doing a lot of the programming, the content, and the development of that. So I take a look at, let's back up just a second and take a look at what NPTC does. And it was originally founded as an organization to, advance the cause of private fleets before Congress. We were an organization along that line, very, very politically motivated and driven. But you take a look at the private fleet community, and I like to say it's a community, not an industry, because it's a collection of different businesses and practices. So, it was hard from an advocacy standpoint to coalesce around certain principles. And so back in I want to say about 30 years ago, we started taking a look at what really differentiated our organization. And it was the educational component. And my background was primarily in politics and lobbying and that type of thing. And that's where I thought I wanted to be. And I'm thankful that my career kind of edged into a different component of the trucking business. And so basically what we do is we put on a series of meetings throughout the course of the year. We run a certification program and we do a benchmarking survey. Those are our 5 core value-added resources. And that benchmarking survey that we do was just released about last month, as a matter of fact, and I look forward to sharing some of that information with you. We're able to use that benchmarking survey as a way to kind of restructure, to form the content for our meetings, for our certification program, and to help drive the discussion of best practices. The overall goal is to elevate the private fleet community through those interactions, through the education, through the information, and the shared resources.
Let's dig into the benchmarking survey a little bit. You talked about that's one of the 5 keys that you produce each year. How do you go about building that? Where do you get the data from?
Well, it's a great question. It is a process that we've been refining since about 2005, when we actually launched our first benchmarking survey. The current survey still has remnants of some of those same metrics, some of those same questions that have been refined over the years. I really depend on a steering committee of about 20 different private fleet professionals that represent different segments of the industry. Flatbed, refrigerated, direct store delivery, these types of professions that help guide the development of the questions. And we have about 250 to 300 different metrics that we survey our membership on. And every year we actually get about 110 to 120 of our members participating, which is a really spectacular return. We've got about 3 times that many members. And to get a third of your members to participate in a survey of this breadth and depth. And I'll tell you, just to give you a quick overview, Craig, we're changing, but typically we send out a PDF, they answer the PDF, and then I have to input that data. It takes me about 20 minutes just to input the data from one of our fleets. Okay. Very time consuming so just think what it takes for our members to complete metrics and safety and operations and finance and, the list goes on and on. And so it's become a very valuable tool to help our members improve their operation, kind of create a dashboard of continuous improvement. And, the one thing I will say, there are a lot of metrics in there. It's never meant to be a critique of the existing operation at all. It's rather a resource to help them improve.
So let's dig into this year's, as we go through, there are key learnings. And obviously, as every report comes out, there are different key learnings. Before we dig into this year's key learnings, how have things changed over the last number of years? What can you point to that really has driven significant change and has been pulled out in those reports, over the last couple of years? More an indication of how the industry is changing, more than anything.
Yeah, it's, it is interesting. That's a great question. And there are a lot of different ways to go about answering it. So I'm going to kind of tackle a lot of different threads that I've seen. I think first and foremost, the private fleet industry is and I just said industry, the private fleet community is a very stable business venture. You don't see wide swings or fluctuations year to year where they're increasing how much freight they're hauling or they're extending their range of operation. It's a very stable business model. And we can talk a little bit about that going forward. But having said that, there are some changes that we've seen, and I think probably driven by COVID and the taking a look at the pandemic and kind of the after effects. We're still in a hangover from that. During COVID, many of our members had to stretch their operation out, and because they weren't able to get the service from their for-hire partners, COVID just kind of disrupted the transportation industry. So our members literally had to take charge of more of the supply chain than they had in the past. Okay, and in the past they would haul what they could do well and then kind of let go of the rest and contract with a for-hire carrier. During COVID, those for-hire carriers were not as available. There was a shortage of capacity out there. The rates were higher. So many of our members said, we need to grab control of that supply chain. And I think what we saw was a shift, taking a look at not necessarily making your private fleet more efficient, but making your supply chain for the company more efficient. Okay. So maybe that compromised the cost effectiveness of our members, but from a supply chain standpoint, that control and that stability gave them more control of the operation. And that's kind of what we're seeing now in some of the after effects of the metrics there. So that is one element. It's like, I would like to say that we've returned to a more normal flow of kind of where we were pre-pandemic, but the level of service is a little bit elevated from where we were before. And we're not giving back as much to the for-hire side of the fence as we did in the past, even despite capacity being a little bit better. So that's one trend. The other trend that I really like to emphasize, and the one that I look at the first every year, and that's safety. Because for a private fleet, if it's not safe, really none of the rest of the metrics matter. If it's not safe, you're not going to be efficient. You're not going to be fully utilized. And so by that measure, our members are recording a DOT recordable accident rate that's under 0.5 accidents per million miles of travel. And the actual number is 0.47. That's about 3 times safer than the industry at large. And so I love to talk about the aggressive management of safety and, drivers and customer service. So,
Do you think those two things are linked? What we talked about coming out of COVID, managing more of the supply chain, and has that led to more focus on security, or do you think that they're separate? It's just they're more highly focused on security, understanding the importance of that, not only to the company but the industry itself.
well, I think there is a linkage there, to be quite honest with you, Craig. I think, again, our folks are looking at how they're measuring their offering, their service offerings. And obviously, customer service is a paramount concern, getting that product there. But part of that customer service element is getting that product there safely. And, with the liability concerns that exist out in the industry today, the trucking industry broadly, you've got to be very careful who you're choosing to do business with, especially as a shipper, which many of our members are. They operate the private fleet as an extension of their primary business. So the control over the safety is a really important element of that customer service value proposition, in my mind.
What are some of the initiatives or practices that you've seen implemented that is driving this with the increased focus? Is there anything you can point to as far as yes?
Yeah, it is interesting. Number one, I think safety starts with a culture. You've got to have a company that's committed to safety, and it's that culture that kind of you wrap everything else, and everything else feeds into it. Whether it's hiring the right kind of people, and that to me is a very critical element that we can always do better. You can always get and continue to elevate the kind of the performance of your people and the candidates that you're bringing in. I think that's one element of it. I think one of the key elements, though, over the past 8 or 10 years is the rise of active safety technologies, lane departure warning, collision mitigation, electronic stability control. There are technologies, in-cab cameras. There are technologies that many of our members have adopted, and the penetration rate has been literally off the charts, excuse me. And with 75% of our members using these technologies. So these technologies are a management tool that they can use to improve their operations, train drivers up, or they train them out, and they get the best out of the drivers. And it also helps, if for some reason technology has to take over, that helps in the overall safety effort. So that's another element of it. And I think, I think our members are also very committed to enhancing their training, understanding really where their drivers are currently, where they need to be, and you have developing good tools to train those drivers into being better performers on the road. So, the benchmarking survey shows that about 3% of the typical private fleet budget is earmarked for training. I think that's part of it too.
Can we focus on the driver? Because in our situation, safety is obviously the most important thing. From a staffing perspective, recruiting perspective, we like to think that if you hire the right person, it's going to drive retention and safety as well. That's where our focus is. And we strongly believe in if you bring the right people in and train them and put them in an environment where we're supporting them with all the tools to drive not only performance but safety, that's what we want to do. How do you think about, in your interaction with the private fleets, how they think about recruiting, bringing the right people in, any driver-related issues? Is that really a topic that you focus on within the community?
I think, Craig, you just put your finger on, I think, what we share in common. I think the hiring the right driver for your job that shares the same corporate values, that you can train, that you can work with, that actually will contribute more than just driving, right? I think that's the critical element. Getting I know it's an overused saying, but get the right people on the bus and you're going to have success. And I take a look at things during our training, our certification curriculum, always talk about the value of a a workforce that has strong retention, low turnover. Those elements, I think those metrics are very important, because if they get, if they go off the charts, they go in the wrong direction, then it makes it increasingly difficult. And as you well know from your business, just because I'm a great driver, I may not be a good fit for this company. But going through that candidate analysis, a very thorough job interview process, the screening protocols, you can make that alignment better. And I think most of our folks would agree that kind of the biggest mistakes they make are typically hiring mistakes, hiring somebody that should not have been hired, ignoring the red flags, a rush to hire. And I think that it's important. And again, our benchmarking survey is showing that our fleets are getting better at using the tools at their disposal to make better hiring decisions. That's where I think it all starts.
Yeah, we see that as well with our carrier clients, that they are more thoughtful on the front end, on the hiring process, the onboarding and training process. But yourself, in this industry, there's always speed to hire as well. And it's always an immediate need, especially when, you're competing with a finite number of drivers in a market. It's sometimes better just to get the driver in the door and then work through any issues that may come. So our carrier partners don't always have the luxury to be able or as thoughtful as they want to be, but knowing that it is an important part. So maybe the emphasis becomes more on the onboarding and, the first 3-6 months continuing to evaluate if they have to take certain actions to get people in the seat early on. It becomes more and more important those first 3 to 6 months to make sure that, okay, you are the right fit. And if there are any issues, address them then. So it's always that balance, right? You want to be thoughtful on the front end and make the right decisions, but you don't always have the luxury to do so.
I think that's a very good point. I mean, it's very easy to sit back and say, we really need to take the time needed to get the right person in, right? But the real world doesn't work that way. I think that's still our goal. And I think it should be thinking not speed to hire, but effectiveness to hire. I kind of like to change those dynamics. I think another element though, Craig, is, and you mentioned it, in terms of the first 90, 120 days and kind of through that orientation cycle. I think one of the elements that helps separate private fleets and many of our members is how those drivers are treated long term. Our average retention rate is about 9 years. Okay. That says something. So when you join a company, you sit there and say, this is what the end result looks like. I'm going to get paid better. And we do have, again, we can get into the pay and compensation and the benefits and all that. And I think that's a strong motivator for many folks to join. So the idea here is, I think private fleets can be somewhat more selective, but I also think the candidates are selecting the right fit for themselves. They see this as a really good opportunity. And with the number of folks that are, word of mouth recruiting and the referrals, that's a really strong sales point. And then, like you say, maybe the technology does allow us to take more of a chance on certain drivers because now we have data on their driving capabilities and behaviors, and we either train them up or we train them out. So
we offer a number of different staffing recruiting program solutions for our carrier partners. Private fleets, do they tend one way or another as far as, recruiting solution or the staffing solution, different platforms on how they tactically bring drivers in as applicants and candidates? Do you see any difference between what the private fleets are doing?
Yeah, I'm starting to see some of that. And I think, again, it's fueled by a lot of different factors. I mean, obviously, we are dealing with a driver shortage. It has eased a little bit over the past year. It's allowed us to be more selective, but that's a temporary illusion. The demand will heat up again. But, again, what I'm seeing from our members, a couple things, and kind of a multi-pronged approach. Number one, I'm seeing a lot of folks that are hiring from within. And by that, I mean they're pulling candidates out of the warehouse or other job functions that want to get into trucking that don't have any trucking experience. And they're working these drivers through in-depth training protocols, through in-house schools, outsourced schooling. And so they're bringing those kind of inexperienced drivers in. And so, if you will, hiring for attitude, training for skills. That, I think, you understand that candidate has the values, they know the product, they have that work ethic that you want.
And I would
That is
assume
working.
retention on those drivers is going to be much higher because they see
Right.
that the company's invested in their future.
That's exactly right. And it doesn't work out 100% of the time, but it does. It creates a pretty strong alignment, I think, going forward.
Yeah.
And that's one element. I think we're getting better at the hiring process in terms of whether it's screening protocols, behavior-based interviewing to really understand who you're bringing in, the whole referrals. But still, I would say the vast majority of our members they're stealing from each other. They're recruiting drivers from other private fleets or from truckload carriers or LTL carriers. And that's really kind of where the essence is. Then using tools like the technology and the training to help provide those elements to help make that driver a keeper.
So one of the things that you just mentioned was hiring from within and developing drivers. I think one of the things that we think about is the population of our drivers and where they are as far as age and stage. We know that the driver population is at an advanced age. How can we combat that and bring more people into becoming a driver, making it more of an attractive career?
Craig, you put your finger right on a very sensitive issue. I think it's really important for us to understand as an industry, as a trucking industry, how do we attract young people into this business that are going to stay, that are going to provide the same values, the same work ethic, and that type of thing is what you and I have grown up in this industry expressing. And it's interesting. At many meetings, I get the opportunity to ride along with some of our country's best drivers every year when we induct people into our Driver Hall of Fame. And these are folks that have 4 million miles of accident-free driving, violation-free driving, injury-free driving. And one of the questions is, would you let your son or daughter drive? Very few of them would. It's just, the industry is changing. So I think it's incumbent upon us to recognize the opportunities that we have. A couple things. Let's start with kind of the older driver population first. One of the things, and our survey shows that for the last 9 years in a row, the average age of drivers, and this is 50,000 drivers in our survey, the average age is over 50 years. Okay. That 50 years old. That's getting up there. It dropped down by a quarter of a year to 49 3/4 years of age this year. First time we've been under 50, but that's still an elderly driving population. And that's despite the number of retirements that we're seeing. So what can we do to help work with those older, more experienced drivers, in terms of, do we turn them more into trainers, advisors, ambassadors? Do we create driver wellness programs to help them work longer and more effectively? Do we modify their work structure? So I think we have the ability to work with an aging driver population, number one, and about 75 to 80% of our members actually do have driver wellness programs that are geared specifically, for those older drivers. I think that's a good place to start because, again, it creates that goal that younger drivers can see. If I work here long enough, I can get paid like this guy is $115,000, $120,000 a year. Okay.
Yep.
So that's excellent. But the other good thing that many of our members have is they can bring in Class B drivers early on in their stage and maybe have them drive medium duty units and get that experience and build up behavioral profile that's going to be allow them to elevate into a full-time Class A CDL type of driver. And I think that, structuring the job in a way to attract some of the younger drivers at age 18 that in a very fully legal manner, to just do deliveries or ride-alongs, I think that's going to be a critical element going forward.
This one may be close to your heart. You may have addressed it. The age of drivers when they're able to get a CDL A, B license. What we hear from some of our drivers is that, truck driving now is a second career. You can't start your career. You've got to go get a job before you can become a driver. So what about lowering the age requirements? I mean, there's insurance, there's safety considerations, but today, if I'm, finishing high school, I can't become a driver. I've got to go get another job before doing that. Do you agree with that? Do you see what's been the discussion around the age?
The discussion kind of covers it from all elements, I think, Craig, to be honest with you. A lot of our members are not in favor of lowering that driver age down to that 18, despite, some of the arguments that you make in favor of that. You do need to capture those people that are interested in driving at an earlier stage. But many of our members at the same time, and again, I think part of that is getting the right kind of data in terms of the safety record of the people, and not every 18-year-old driver is unsafe. Not every 18-year-old driver is safe. Not every 65-year-old driver is safe, and on and on. So understanding those the safety risks and those elements, I think, are absolutely critical. And I think getting more facts around that. I've seen some facts where the younger drivers, they have more frequency of accidents, but less severity. Okay. And as the population ages, then you see that switch a little bit. And indeed, our benchmarking survey shows a little bit of that. But I think you take a look at a number of our companies, they do have a network of medium and light duty operations in which an 18-year-old can get in and they can drive, and or be a work as a deliverer, loader, unloader, get involved. And if they see kind of the goal at the end, I think that there's that helps. I think we do have an advantage as a private fleet community in many cases to attract younger people into that job that maybe have the vision of what it looks like at the end, and also that can take advantage of driving a medium duty rig, into certain delivery applications, final mile applications, that type of thing.
So the advantage again of bringing somebody in, develop them, show them a career path, and develop and hire within is right. Something that right. And are the fleets they know that advantage? They're concentrating, focusing on that as part of building up their driver pool.
I think that certain of our members are, yes. When you take a look at the non-CDL driver population, it's about 1 out of every 5 drivers is a non-CDL driver. So that says something right there. And obviously, it's got to be the right network, the right structure, and that type of thing. And then the other option that many of our fleets have, especially, and that's the intrastate operations that may have different regulations than the age 21. So being able to keep a driver intrastate is also an advantage that many of our companies are taking advantage of.
So what's next, Tom, for you? What's on the horizon? What are you working on? What's most interesting for you right now?
Well, I'm going to kind of lean back into the benchmarking survey just a little bit. I like to kind of take some of those metrics and detangle them and pry them apart and build programming around that to see, what is, to answer some of the questions that you're answering, how do we build a program that attracts younger drivers? How do we take a driver turnover rate that has, that spiked last year at 23%. Now it's back down to 19%, which by industry standards is phenomenal. but it's still painful when you're paying $10,000 to replace a driver. You've got to manage that turnover. How do we improve driver turnover? How do we lower that risk? That's the safety risk that's associated with driver turnover. Um, what does compensation look like? Going forward, our drivers are very, very well paid, but are there better ways to compensate that driver and get more skin in the game? So just pulling out metrics like that. I know it's not related to this conversation, but even some of the equipment usages, in terms of how's equipment, how do we wrap the right kind of equipment around a load? How is that changing? How do we trade that equipment in a way that attracts drivers, that extends our operation? And the private fleet community is changing. We're reaching out. We're building terminals and distribution centers and drop yards and that type of thing to position our operation closer to the end customer. So, what does that look like long term in terms of driver retention, getting drivers home every night, getting them in the right kind of equipment? I mean, just, what? That's the beauty of this industry, Craig, is, just when you think you've got your hands wrapped around it, that's a danger point because,
Yeah. Don't get comfortable.
Just things stay the same. They change an awful lot too. And just, to me, that's the beauty of understanding those people that are kind of pushing the envelope, getting out in front of these issues and treating their drivers the right way.
One of the things that I think about, pay, schedule, all of the things that make it a good job are important. One of the things that I think there's a gap that we can help with is information. The drivers don't always have the right information to make informed decisions on pay or schedule. They don't know all of the opportunities that they have available to them to be able to make informed decisions to take that next step. How do we get the drivers more information? Pay is probably the biggest thing that, if you're in Indianapolis, you should have an understanding of what you're worth or what you should be making. Do you think about that as far as, helping the driver, increasing retention for the carriers too? Because if the driver is happy in the situation, the quality of life is good, they feel like they're compensated for the value they're driving, they're going to stick. But if there's any issues and drivers start questioning, oh, maybe I could do more here or have more here, I think if we can address that and take that out of the equation, your retention is going to increase. But getting the drivers that information so that they can make informed decisions, say, hey, this is the best place for me, I think is important. And it's not going to be an easy thing to do, but I think it's one of those gaps that nobody really talks about, but I think there's an opportunity there.
I think there's a tremendous opportunity, Craig. I think you put your finger on that. I mean, obviously, I think a lot of job satisfaction starts and ends with pay. I mean, it just, but that's a part of that element, right? And talking about the way drivers are paid, and it is kind of interesting when you take a look at our driver population, and I kind of put them in different buckets, right? You got the over the road type of driver that may not be home as frequently, probably more of a mileage based pay structure. And then you take a look at more what I would call the regional. They're typically home more often, running out a couple hundred miles. And then you've got the local, so I kind of bucket those. And you have within our community about a third of obviously the mileage component goes down as you go from over the road down to local, but you still have roughly in each one of those three categories, about a third of the drivers being paid by the mile, about a third being paid on a hourly basis, and about a third being paid by by performance or activity based. The idea here, though, is to be transparent in what that driver is going to earn instead of, okay, and we're watching each one of those elements go up in terms of their gross earnings, whether it's mileage based or hourly based, but they need to be able to know at the end of the year what they're going to be bringing home. And, if I could be making 51 cents a mile and you could be making 61 cents a mile, that looks better for you. But if you're not getting the miles, it doesn't matter,
Right. Doesn't matter.
And we're not. it becomes kind of, if you will, a loss leader, and it sets up the drivers for a lot of dissatisfaction. So, I think the idea, many of our members are offering guaranteed minimum pay to their drivers. So that driver knows at the end of the year, they are going to be making this much money at a minimum. And I think, and then we're also starting to see some drivers, a small percentage, getting paid a salary, which is very, very interesting. That changes the whole dynamics.
Why have some carriers taken that step? And why haven't we taken that step before? Why haven't a larger number of carriers taken that step? You're committing a certain number of dollars, and there's risk there. But you understand your resources, what they can do, understand the importance of retention and the costs of driver turnover. That may be the next step, but it's not an easy step to get to. There's no requirement, and there's not enough data to inform whether it's the right step at this point.
Right. You're right. I mean, I think it's a very tired truism, that exists. The reason why more people aren't doing it is because it's never been done before. It's like, it's we're an industry that's paid by the mile, so we kind of can control that exposure. I'm not sure that that's a model going forward that's going to be quite as effective. I think more and more fleets are going to be starting to take a look, literally, at keeping that driver retained, eliminating the churn of drivers. And just the other thing, again, compensation is one element. It's about how that driver is treated, and pay is a part of how they're treated. But they want to be treated as part of a team and honored and that type of thing. It's just, typically speaking, we do something in our training, Craig, and hopefully you'll appreciate this as being born into the trucking industry. And that is, we often say that our driver is our biggest asset, right? And it's like our number one asset, but assets can be depreciated and often are depreciated. You think about the equipment. So do we just change the dynamic by treating that driver as our most important shareholder or investor? Because we're automatically, we're investing, they're investing their day with us every day. And whether they come in fired up, I think that has an awful lot to do with the safety performance. And if you treat that driver with courtesy, respect, and, kind of the golden rule mentality, does that change the dynamics? And,
that's a subtle change, but I think it's a very important change that, when you talk that to people get it, they understand. Because if the driver's invested and you're both invested in the same thing, that's just a positive. To your point, an asset depreciates and is not treated the same way, but it's an important shift in thinking.
I think what we're seeing is many companies evolve to that understanding of creating a driver-centric culture. And I think, we talked about early on in this conversation about creating a safety culture and as being very important. And I think the two are almost overlapping. It's hard to have a safety culture without a driver-centric culture, bottom line. So creating that culture in which drivers know that when they come to work, they're going to be valued. If they're tired or if they're sick, that they have no problem saying, I can't do the work today. They won't be penalized. But if they work hard, they know that they can retire as a millionaire, following the company investment protocols. And many of our companies are helping the drivers from a financial standpoint, giving them financial training and that type of thing. So the idea is to treat the driver as the value that they really are. And
it's really how you want to be treated yourself. We're no different. There's no other job that's different. You want to come to work understanding and knowing that what you're doing is valued and you're treated accordingly. I think
exactly. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I probably get in trouble when I talk about this in the training, but the number one reason for private fleets to exist is customer service. That's what our survey shows. Everybody, it's how you measure the customer service that's important, and we are seeing expansion in the breadth and depth of those metrics that our members are using, which is absolutely essential. I always want to come back and take a look at the training protocols and say, are we training our drivers for customer service? Are we giving them the tools they need, because they're often the face of the company in front of the customers. So are we giving them the tools to help manage effectively that customer interaction? And the other part of it is, you take a look at a company like Ritz-Carlton, right? I stayed there one time in a different career when I was working for the Port Authority down in Georgia, and they do customer service training, and all their employees, whether it's the housekeeping staff or the front desk staff, they have the authority to spend $1,000 to resolve a customer complaint right on the spot. The customer checks in, housekeeping says, oh, the bed's not made, the customer's unhappy. Here's a bottle of champagne, right? Yeah. So I always talk in our training. I said, so if customer service is the number one reason why we exist, then I'm sure that your drivers have the ability to spend $1,000 to rectify a customer service issue. Show of hands. It's like, no, they don't even get reimbursed for getting cookies or donuts at the loading dock so that they can get loaded quickly and get out of there. They're buying those on their own. It's like, so again, it's kind of the I don't know, the synergy that's kind of created between what you say your goals are and how the driver is treated. I'd just like to see us to continue to get more alignment there, because therein lies the power,
Yeah,
of a good operation.
So, Tom, we are at time. I'm at time. I apologize. This has been great, a great conversation. We would love to have you back, because there's so much more that we can go back and forth on and pick your brain. Love to continue the conversation through your work with the NPTC. It's great work. It's important work. But more than anything, thank you for coming on and spending some time with us today. This was a great dry run. So the real run will be even better, and we look forward to that.
And Craig, I just want to say also, from that standpoint, is we value our relationship tremendously with Transforce. You all have been great supporters of ours in terms of your sponsorship and our interaction and our partnership. And it just, again, it takes I overused word. It takes a village to kind of create the right kind of momentum, the right kind of alignment. And you guys have just been great partners.
Well, I appreciate that, Tom. All right.
Well, Craig, you're a natural at this. You make it so easy just to kind of, I mean, I felt like we were at a bar having a conversation, and it's just
That's like, what it should be like. That was my goal. Next time we'll do it over beer. How about that, Tom?